I want to introduce our speakers and moderator. In the sake of, giving them the floor, I have cut down the bios quite a bit, but they are very incredible, and I learned a lot about them while I was reading them, so I highly encourage checking them out. So we've got Raudline Etienne on the line, who is a strategic advisor who focuses on developing business strategies and expanding opportunities in the investment sector. The founder and managing partner of her own advisory firm, Raudline is now applying her 25 plus years of institutional investment experience to assist her clients with the design, development, and positioning, of their investment products. We've got Karla Trotman on the line, who is the president and chief executive officer of Electro Soft Incorporated, an electronics manufacturing and engineering firm in the United States. She holds a BS in business logistics from the Pennsylvania State University and an MBA from Drexel University. The breadth of her experience in business extends to supply chain logistics, purchasing, global scheduling, and e-commerce, where she served in key roles in companies to include Honeywell, Gap, and IKEA. And moderating today's conversation, we've got Gerty Simon on the line. Gerty is a regional diversity officer of the Mid-Atlantic region at a wealth management firm. She joined the diversity and inclusion team in September of 2019 at the firm and is responsible for the development and integration of the firm's field strategy for recruiting and retaining diverse talent, fostering an inclusive work environment, and ensuring management accountability. And so with that, I'm going to hand the mic right over to you, ladies, and thank you so much for being here today.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Thank you, Power to Fly, for giving us an opportunity to speak with you and your audience. I am so excited about this conversation. We had a couple of prep talks, and the Black women are just going to lean back in their living rooms and have a real conversation. So welcome to that. Welcome, Raudline. Welcome, Karla. I can't wait to hear about your stories and giving our audience an opportunity to walk away with some additive resources and hearing some tidbits that will help them along their journeys. So with that, I like to always say, let's get smarter. So I'm going to turn it over to Raudline. And Raudline, can you introduce yourselves? Tell us a little bit about your personal career journey.
Sure. Thank you for having us. Very excited to be here. My name is Raudline Etienne. I have had an eclectic series of careers that range from architecture for a few minutes to accounting and to finally finance, where I've spent the last 25 years advising and being an institutional investor and trafficking in the powers of high finance and the buy side, as we like to call it. I am nowhere near what I studied as an undergraduate. That's how life happens. But I've been in a very interesting, quickly evolving space and look forward to sharing more details as we have this conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Raudline. I can't wait for the conversation as well. Karla, let me turn over to you. Can you give us a little bit about your personal career journey?
Absolutely. After leaving college, I had an interesting career in supply chain logistics. I actually went to school for logistics, as was mentioned. At the time, not many people it wasn't the hot career that it is now. I was really interested in how you move things from point of origin to point of consumption for some reason. I don't know why. But I think once you have that skill set, you can see anything from a linear perspective and all the other options around. So it was a wonderful foundation for me. As I was going through that career, my life changed. I got married, I had children, I started a business, I left corporate America, and I decided to take over my family's manufacturing company. Something I swore I would never, ever do. I never wanted to work in manufacturing, and I surely did not want to work with my father. But here we are now. I am now the owner. My father has retired, and it has been an incredible journey, and I am happy to share it with you today.
We all know that, and I think there's so many in the audience that can relate to that. So it's it's interesting to hear both your perspectives perspectives on this subject matter. So thank you to you both. So as I said, it's a conversation. We're in the living room, but I'm mindful of the audience that's out there. So can you discuss your industry and give us a broad outline of your business, right? Because that's going to be a lot of the connectivity that we're talking about. And it would be helpful, I think, to the audience to understand the context you operate in as we go through these discussions. So with that, Raudline, let me start with you.
Sure. So the industry that I refer to as the buy side consists of large pools of capital that are managed on behalf of beneficiaries or stakeholders. By those, I mean there are corporate pension funds, public pension funds, endowments, foundations, insurance companies who all have billions of dollars of assets that they are responsible for, that they invest for a purpose, whether the purpose is to help with the retirement of their beneficiaries, or the purpose is to be able to give grantees grants to do social good in the country and in the world. These institutional pools of capital are managed by third-party asset managers and fund managers. And so you have an industry that represents trillions of dollars in capital that is managed by thousands of asset managers and fund managers on behalf of these constituents. When you look at the landscape that I operate in, it is a landscape where there is not a lot of diversity, frank, period, stop. And I spent a lot of time as a consultant that is advising the institutional pools of capital on their investment strategy and the selection of these managers. And then I became the chief investment officer of the New York State Pension Fund. That is one of, I think, the third largest pension fund in the US. And to just give some context, the scale that we're talking about, New York's pension fund is over $200 billion today. And so there's staff, there are people who are making decisions on behalf of the pension fund, but the majority of not the majority, a significant chunk of the portfolios are managed by outside parties. Those outside parties are brand names that most will recognize, so I'm not going to name check anyone. But there are small firms, there are large conglomerates, and there are multiple products that people put together in a portfolio in order to reach their objectives. And again, as this is about inclusion, in this industry that I operate in, the assets under management, the economic ownership of minorities and women is negligible as far as I'm concerned. And so there's a lot of work to do, and that is what I'm dedicated to at this moment.
And we're happy to have you here to delve into that because, how strongly you feel about it and what an interesting aspect of your world. So I'm wondering those out there that can relate to that and have been in that pool, right? Because there is I'm talking to two exceptional Black women who are CEOs and founders, yet there's two different pathways. So Karla, can you tell me a little bit about your world in that vein?
On the complete and utter opposite side of the world exists my world of manufacturing. I had to put on mute because I have 2 children, a dog and a husband, a landscaper, and a whole bunch of things going on. So excuse my, fumbling. So in manufacturing, what we do in particular is think of the Apple iPhone product or any of the products that they have. Apple, for example, just one of many companies, does not have manufacturing facilities. They outsource their manufacturing to a company called Foxconn over in Southeast Asia. And Foxconn will work with Apple's engineers, their product engineers, their design engineers, and take their drawings, their schematics, and create the Apple products for consumers. They will package them, they'll do all the printed circuit board work and get it ready for us to buy and ship them off. My company is similar to Foxconn in that we create products that belong to our customers. We're their outsourced manufacturing arm. And we do that for many, many companies, but in the industrial space, we are not B2C. We are selling business to business, and mostly in industrial and defense electronics. Our focus in that is printed circuit board assemblies, so those green boards that are in every device that you have, wiring and cables and harnesses and box builds, pretty much I call it the brain and central nervous system of any electronic device. So we all know that electronics is, a huge part of how we live, function, and operate in this society. We're dealing in commodities because of tin and gold and the other things that are going into the capacitors and the boards and the copper that's interlaced through the boards. We're doing a lot of pricing. We're doing buying from a global perspective. We're also working with multiple partners and engineers and finance departments and contractors and people who are trying to drive the price down while they can increase their margins for bottom line. And when this company came to be 35 years ago, when my father started the business, it originally, with the name Electro Soft, was an electromechanical assembly and software writing company. We would develop the product, we would build it in our manufacturing facilities, and then we would write the software as well for the equipment. But just like in most businesses, your customer will pretty much shape what you sell. And so there was a higher demand for manufacturing. And so we focus primarily on the manufacturing. As you can imagine, there are not very many people who look like me in electronics manufacturing and manufacturing in general, especially in the ownership levels. I asked one of my biggest suppliers, which is one of the biggest companies worldwide for everything industrial. And I asked, in America, who else does exactly what we do? And she said, there's one other family-owned business that are Native American and they live in a reservation in Arizona. So that's how unique the space we are in. But there are a lot of companies that do what we do. And oftentimes I am the only person that looks like me. So finance is an issue when it comes to being a woman in this and a woman of color in this, and decisions are made. And so I have a lot that I would love to delve into as we discuss this today.
Incredible. So, and we're getting that bird's eye view of someone that's sitting in that seat and learning from you, right? And in hearing about what that looks like from your vantage point. So, and I think that's important because I'm always going to refer back to this audience and who's out there and who could be possibly listening to you. So, this is about financial inclusion. It's a black women sitting down having a conversation. So I think, it's important for us to give advice out there. So Raudline, I want to turn to you and I want to say, what advice would you give to women who are looking to take their careers to the next level, such as moving from an individual contributor to a manager, or from being a manager to a C-suite level director, right? And it sounds like, you've had opportunities to be in a lot of those spaces. So I can't wait to hear how you respond to this.
I think that's a very interesting question. I hadn't thought about myself in that context, but here's what I would offer. Two things. The first is to try to have as global of a view of yourself in the context of the organization and where your organization fits, so that you understand the big picture as much as you can. I think the second thing is to be aware and open to taking risk and pursuing opportunities, right? To the extent that you stay within your comfort zone, it's hard to make the leaps. And for me, the progress comes when you're willing to take the risk and go do something that may be different than what you had done before. And, I have an anecdote to share in the context of, one of the things I do is I sit on boards. And one of the boards had a recruiting process that involved a personality test that I resisted at first, but eventually you had to surrender and do it. And the industrial psychologist who gave me my profile said to me that she thought I was a risk taker. And I would never define myself as such. But she made me reflect because I have taken leaps. I didn't view them as risky because I analyzed the downside and said, okay, I can live with that downside. But I would encourage people who are thinking about progress to think about themselves in new ways and be willing to sort of make that leap while they're calculating what the worst case scenario is. Because once you're comfortable with that, the leap is not as big as you think.
I love that. And listen, we're we're sitting at this introspection, right? The pandemic has brought so much of that opportunity, and folks had an opportunity to sit down and say, am I happy with what I'm doing, right? And here is the moment to raise your hands and say, okay, I'm going to do something different. So I love what you said about, the global view of the company, because we don't think about that. We think about going to work, sitting down and doing what is asked of us. But I think that's so important. Karla, I can't wait to hear what you have to add to that.
Well, similar to what Raudline had mentioned, that it was reminiscent of what I was thinking of. You have to be entrepreneurial. I mean, I'm third generation entrepreneur in a sense that my grandmother had a restaurant, my mother had a business, my father had a business, I started a business as well. And so I only know of people like wearing 15 hats and just executing. I don't know, when I first went into corporate America and that whole meeting about the meeting and the next meeting about the meeting, I was like, what's going on? I thought we decided we were going to do it. Like, why are we meeting again? And it just wasn't my mindset. And I had to learn that there is a process, and then there's people you have to ask, and then there's different levels to this thing. But when it came down to project execution, I was able to move forward and execute because that's where my mindset was. And I was successful in navigating different levels of organizations because of my ability to execute and not ask for permission all the time for every step. And I think that was instrumental in a lot of my success. Also, I never stopped learning. As Raudline said about, going outside your comfort zone and really branching out. I mean, if you don't know something, it's okay. You can learn it. You can figure it out. Everybody else says they know it. And, I don't know why oftentimes, and maybe I'm speaking for myself and other friends and women of color, we're so sometimes paralyzed by the fact that we're going to have imposter syndrome and people are going to figure out that we really don't know what we're doing. I've been in so many rooms where no one knew what was going on that I realized that just say yes and figure it out was my new modus operandi, and it has served me well.
That is such a good one. And it's so true.
Yeah.
Because without making the sweep of broad generalizations, I have to, if I don't know 90%, I'm not comfortable.
Right.
So part of risk taking is also saying, listen, I don't know. And they don't know either. Right. So go ahead and step into the light.
Right. It may as well be you. You may as well take charge and then get the credit for it.
Or they don't know that you don't know. So then, who's the imposter there, right?
Right.
So I love that. And I think all of this, goes back into this opportunity, right? Because when we think about it, in so many of the industries that we're in, right, the financial business, you have to be in the office, right? That was a requirement. And we've seen how much we had to learn about technology for some folks that were like, oh, I'm afraid to hit that button. But that button was what you had to hit to make sure you understood what you were, the apparatus that you were working with to get through in terms of what we're dealing with now, and being at home. So very interesting, and some key points there. So I hope folks out there are taking notes on that. So Karla, in your opinion, and this is based on your personal experience, What can companies do to hire more diverse individuals?
So, that whole saying, and it's something reminiscent of, if you do what you always did, you get what you always got. I never understood why, if you're looking for more, for example, Black candidates, people of color, why aren't you hiring at HBCUs? Why are you not looking in Black churches or Asian churches or, Hispanic communities for the people that you want? We do a fantastic job as a diverse woman-owned business hiring diverse people. My company is 50% diverse in women. I would say it's over 60% people of color. And I mean, statistically, people of color do tend to be more diverse as an organization, absolutely. But if companies want to be diligent about doing it, make it a KPI, put it in a performance evaluation, because once it becomes something that you're accountable to, people will do it, especially when it's tied to compensation.
And Raudline, what would you add to that? And in addition to that, also, what could companies do to support the employees and empower them? From your experience.
I want to first say amen to Karla's comment, because I've had conversations with CEOs at asset managers who are talking to me about the fact that they can't find talent, and it would make my head explode, right? I think one of the things that companies should focus on is the idea that perhaps there is cultural change that needs to happen, not just from the top, you need the support of the top, but throughout to the bottom. And so if you have an intent, it needs to be measurable. It needs to be throughout all of the communication pathways that you have in your organization. And you have to actually validate and check and ask and touch base to see whether what you are saying is actually being implemented. And so inclusion is beyond recruiting. It's about creating an environment that allows people to thrive, all sorts of people. And for most organizations, I think, especially if you are not part of that ethos from the beginning, that requires cultural transformation that is not only about KPIs, but is about the culture that you're establishing and the norms that you're reinforcing in your organization. And that is difficult work, and that takes time. But it is not enough to just recruit, because I know you can recruit and you lose them, a few years later, because the culture of the organization is frustrating.
Amen.
Yeah, no, without question. And I recall, Karla Harris was on a panel for Power to Fly in March. And one of the key things that I recall her saying was, it's going to be interesting to look back, right, 5 years from now, when we're all having this discussion, and just see how far we've actually come. So great points there to both of you. So this is about Black women CEOs and founders, which you both are. So let's talk about Black women and those who are considering leaving the corporate workforce, right? We're hearing so much about this in the news of late. But there is this surge of Black women leaving to start their own businesses. What was your trigger, to start a new business and break out on your own? And what perspective would you like to share with the aspiring entrepreneur that might be in our audience? Karla, let me go to you first on that.
There wasn't just one trigger, being in a non-inclusive environment can be triggering and can cause you to very much question, why am I here? Especially when sometimes I remember sitting, and it wasn't every company, mind you, and every day, but sometimes I felt like that college over-prepared me for this environment, and that I was not completely fulfilled in the manner in which I knew I felt like I should be. For example, one day I said to my coworker, just randomly, like, if I died in this chair they would roll me right out the door and replace me with someone else. Like, that's how meaningless my presence is in this time and space. And it was like one of those epiphanies that really hit me. And then I looked in, and it doesn't matter if I look around the room, I look around any room, I'm usually the only person of color or only female, or definitely the only female of color. And that, like I said, never bothered me. But there's some like communal things that I never really got down with. I felt that oftentimes I was in competition with my managers for some reason, or I didn't feel in competition, but they felt it and put that energy toward me. That, you know, some of the goals that I had for myself, that they would say, no, we want you to go this way. And that I wasn't seen as, for me, for who I was as a human being. But I also, you know, even though I had this family business, and that wasn't even an option in my mind, I felt that in order for me, though, to really, what cut my teeth in all of this and just made me decide to leave was I had a very difficult pregnancy. Because of my background in supply chain and logistics, I was able to identify that there were all of these women who had created products but did not have distribution for the same ailments that I was going through. Now, this is before Facebook was extremely popular. This was when people were on message boards and they were saying, oh, this is terrible about pregnancy. And I'm like, why didn't anyone tell me pregnancy was so daggone terrible and hard? And so when I found these products, I became the go-to person for products and ended up creating a website and a store. And then it ended up being a celebrity favorite and all these things happened. And once I did this business thing, this experiment in having my own, I realized I can bet on myself. I can make money on myself. Equity is a beautiful thing. And I want to leave my family a legacy. And it does not involve me dying in a chair and being pushed out the door. And that was my point.
And it's so interesting because so often you find that folks that are successful in this platform have discovered and have felt the need to go out there and search for something that they couldn't find for themselves, right? Mm-hmm. I needed, Spanx because I was tired of wearing that dress that made me look like this. And so I'm going to go out there and create it. Raudline, what do you have to add to this subject?
I don't think I can point to a particular trigger. I think it's sort of a run up to life, and more that I had been independent without a boss. And once I reached that point, it was hard to go back to having a boss. And I have found that, leadership and good leadership is difficult to find, right? And so I think I was at a moment in life. I mean, I had attempted other businesses before. I'm sure that there were grammar school and high school and college attempts at entrepreneurship, some great idea that we never executed. But I think it was the moment in my career and my view that there needed to be more entities like my own in the business, right? So it was partly the desire for independence, and partly because I felt that what I was doing and what I was as an entrepreneur was filling a gap that was missing in the space I operated in.
So, when we think about this and we leave this topic, I'm thinking about the audience. I would say if there's something nagging, right? Every day you wake up and you're going to work and you're not happy, right? It affects the whole day, and God only knows what it's doing inside of you, right? So take a pause moment and reflect, use this time and listen to what our panelists are saying on what triggered them, and just take a step, right? One step that could make it such a change in your life. So thank you. Thank you both for providing some perspective on that. So we are in an era of protests against systemic racism, right? And an unprecedented push to support and buy from Black-owned businesses. And I know that both of you sitting in your seats, you're seeing it, we're hearing it, it's on the media, it's coming from the corporate America. And founders, advocates are hoping to build upon this momentum, right? One would hope, but also wonder if the support being shown to Black-owned businesses, let alone those founded by Black women, is it here to stay, right? So can we trust what's going on right now, right? And it's all about metrics and what comes later. So I want to ask you this, and Karla, I'm going to direct this to you. How have you seen the pandemic affect Black women in business, especially as entrepreneurs, as CEOs and founders? You know, you gave some really interesting insight about, you know, why you wanted to leave and what was your trigger. But there's been quite a few discussions of late on diverse communities post-Floyd. So before I go into that, just tell me, you know, what have you seen in this pandemic in your industry?
Okay, so real talk, okay? Not a lot. So I've had experiences where friends of mine have reached out to me and have told me that their companies asked them as the person of color to write the company statement on Black Lives Matter, on the death of George Floyd. And I was kind of like, are you really going to write it for them? And they asked me, well, what should I do? I said, you should ask them what their statement is on Black Lives Matter and George Floyd. And if it really is just a statement or if there's some action behind it. And that's really what the concern is for me, that there's been a lot of promises made and not a lot of execution. There's a lot of pledges made to help with the desire to help, let's say. And I'm not clear. A lot of people are just not clear on how it's going to be executed and to whose benefit. And oftentimes I find that of the tools that have been filtered out, of the assistance that's been filtered out outside of the cash, because as business owners, we definitely need cash, yes. There's things that we need that are being offered to us that we may not necessarily need. And it causes me to think that were there people of color, women, anybody at the table, once there was a decision made to offer support to Black-owned businesses. So while it is definitely appreciated, and I love that the spotlight is on us, if there's really going to be an outpouring of assistance and help, of support, I think we need to have a better understanding of what the needs are of Black and brown businesses, of everybody in general. And then we need to understand how it's going to be executed, quite honestly.
You know,
Completely to the point. Go ahead, Raudline.
I have to pipe in on this because for me, there's corollaries in what you're saying in the recruiting issue, right? You know, why? So for me, this is a lot of talk and I'm waiting for the action. And I do have a particular lens, which is about the commitment of capital. So that's the thing I'm tallying. But there's a lot of PR and there's a lot of performance. And I'm looking for the actions that back up the performance. And what I observe is the hoopla and the announcement, once you scratch the surface, does not necessarily have a lot of risk capital, a lot of financial commitment behind it. And I think your point about I'm offering what I do to help Black businesses, the missing link is the organizations who are trying to understand what the businesses need and tailor solutions for them. And it is so far, and of course, there's exceptions to the rule. depending on the day you get me, whether it will be sustained or with glass half full or glass half empty, I think it's still a question whether the spotlight is going to actually lead to the deployment of capital and to the sharing of power, because that's ultimately what this is about.
Agreed. I mean, and not to throw off the conversation, but you just hit something there for me. I mean, the sharing of power is definitely what it is. You think of any time when no woman could vote, it really comes down to, is power now understand that it's within their interest to allow women to vote? Civil rights, is it within the interest to allow Black people to vote, Black people to have equal rights, for Asian American people, for Hispanic people? It all does come down to power. Is power convinced enough to allow everybody else an equal share, an opportunity? Are you willing to give up something for the benefit of the whole? And that's really the conversation that we're afraid to have, because, you know, right now everyone's pushing back, saying that cancel culture is such a terrible thing. And because people are voting with their dollars. You know, if you say something or do something that I, as a Black woman, don't like, I don't have to buy your stuff. That is not cancel culture. That is consequence culture. That is a consequence of your actions. Same thing. Now, people of color are using their voices to say, hey, we do want equity, not equality. We want equity, which are two different things. We want solutions that fit us as people. And, you know, that's the conversations we've not yet had.
And Karla, let's go back to this.
Raudline was about to say something. I'm sorry, I saw
don't miss out. We're in the living room now, so go ahead, make that statement.
You know, but I think the point about we are at the table. I mean, power concedes nothing, right?
Yeah.
We sort of have to collectively demand it, and the hope of this moment is that we are at the table, and there's a generation of people saying, no, this is not acceptable. And my dollars are not going to support you if you support Y, right? To the extent that there is more collective action, you know, I think power is not going to voluntarily give up anything, never has.
Right.
Right? Nobody ever gives up their power. I mean, okay, there's always the rare exception, right? And so the question is the momentum going to continue? And that's only going to be a yes is if there's masses of people who are on this purpose and this mission, right? But I don't think it's also a coincidence that, you know, at the risk of being political, that, you know, Black women politically have said, we're at the table and this is what we want, right? And from my perspective, we need to do that in all spheres.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Great. Karla, you were going to make a point. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying amen.
Let's let the church say amen.
Yeah.
Listen, we're in a state right now where we're not asking for a seat at the table, right? It's a demand now. So, and folks have to figure out a way to make room for the other chairs coming in if one is not leaving, right? So I think this is an important point, and it starts here. And for folks out there, you know, that might be in small companies, get involved, right? Figure out if you have ENGs. Let's see what is the question that's being put on the table for discussion, right? And you have to raise your hand to make sure that what you want the firm to focus on is being focused on, because you're there answering surveys. Because a lot of time, you know, as much as you ladies are, you know, clearly invested in this conversation, there's so many folks that are saying, well, it's never going to happen, so I'm not going to say anything, right? And that's part of what has to change for us. So
yeah.
Well, you know, we could spend days on this. This is like, get out the wine and let's really sit back, but we have a limited amount of time, and there's a couple of other things I really want to talk about. So number one, and I think this is a great segue, right? Because I go back to the theme of today's summit, right? Financial inclusion. And I think that, you know, what we know is this. We know that Black women make up 14% of the female population, right? In the US, but 42% of all new women-owned businesses during 2014 and 2019. And that's something that I had read recently. Black women own more than 2 million businesses, and women of color are 4.5 times more likely to start a business than any other group. And yet in 2020, right, Black women received only 0.27%. And I read up on this for this conversation. So am I surprised? No. So I can't wait to hear from you all about capital funding and about 54% of Black-owned startups attempted to seek funding. And here we are with this number. So talk to me about raising funds, because we know it's not one size fits all, right? And you both have already advised the audience of the various paths that you're both on. So let's get into that, right? Let's get into that. So Raudline, let's start with you.
That statistic is so scandalous to me. It's just so scandalous. So again, I'm coming from a perspective where there are significant sums of money at play. And the statistic that I refer to, which is similar to the one you have, is perhaps maybe 1% of the assets of this industry are managed by minority and women-owned firms. If I look at that statistic, first of all, that is a ridiculous statistic, A. Now think about parsing that into Black women-owned firms. I can name them on one hand, right? The challenge of raising capital in my space is incredibly complex, because you're talking about an industry where the capital raise is not in the tens of thousands. The capital raise is in the millions just to start, right? And the idea of passing the hat around to your friends and family, if your friends and family don't have millions to put, a million here, a million there, you can forget about it. And the reality of the space that I operate in is, if you're not in the corridors of the super wealthy, if you didn't go to the right prep school, if you're not in the network of this private school or that, club, it's incredibly difficult, because you don't have that intergenerational wealth as a foundation for you to take risks. And it's nearly impossible. And, part of what I've been focused on is trying to address that barrier of entry, because I think there should be entrepreneurs in this space of finance, as well as the household entrepreneur who's doing, interesting and creative homemade products. But no matter where you are in the spectrum, you face the same hurdle, which is you either don't have access to the networks, or you're not a member of the network, or those in power and those who control the capital do not see your viability. They just see you as risk. I think it's a huge missed opportunity, right? There is so much interesting activities going on with people who are in smaller segments, who are in niche segments, who've got just a different approach to investing, for example. And for me, the biggest tragedy in my industry is that talent doesn't get the opportunity to realize their vision. If that talent is recognized, the parent company wants to hold it close, right? It doesn't want to sponsor it to fly. So that's my first pass at capital.
That was deep. Okay, that was very deep. Karla, what do you got?
I was so into everything that you were just saying. Even though our stories are very, very different, and there's just so much that's the same.
Yeah.
When my father started the company, I mean, he was a director of engineering for a large company that decided to shut down instrumentation. So he didn't have a job. He was laid off. And oftentimes people, when they are laid off and they don't know what they're going to do, they decide to start businesses. But someone actually called him about building cable because they knew that he understood manufacturing. And then that build on the kitchen table turned into multiple builds that then turned into a company. So it was the company that wasn't really supposed to happen. But once he made the decision to let it happen, his options for funding were very slim, because oftentimes in our communities, he was the most wealthy and successful person in his social circle. So there was no friends and family raise. He went and used his own money, he and my mother, their money, used credit cards, which is definitely, they say, a no-no, but that's another story of everything they tell you to do. And starting a business, Black people got to do something totally different. People of color got to do something totally different. It's most of the things they tell you not to do. So he started this business with credit cards and whatnot, eventually becoming successful, doing all the programs that are available, did the 8A government program, everything that was right, build this business, now can walk into any bank, get whatever he wants, okay? I come to execute on our succession plan, and I need 7 figures. I've never gone to a bank and asked for 7 figures. I never asked anybody for 7 figures of nothing. So I started relationships with banks years before I needed the money. And even though we have $1 million worth of equipment, this long trajectory, this long history, we had a book of business, long-term clients, I still could not get the loan for what I needed, the total amount to buy my father out. And I had assets as well. I have properties. I had multiple homes. And it just wasn't happening. And I was extremely confused, because the American dream is you walk into a bank, you say, I need money, and they give it to you. It does not happen that way. Thankfully, I had a strong enough relationship with a bank that was expanding into the region. I met a gentleman on a board that I'm on, again, in the right rooms, who, it was definitely a board that I don't know how I ended up on, but I'm on it. And this gentleman pretty much gave me what I needed, a little bit short, but it was enough that it was negligible. I can't say that. It was a lot of money I still had to make up. In the end, I was able to buy my father out. That's the point of the story. That's not how it happens for everyone. And that's a good story in comparison to others. When I started my online business, no one gave me any money. There was no angel investment. I definitely did not ask my family, because I was a little embarrassed by my little idea of having a pregnancy store it was just kind of my thing. I thought frivolously of it. But when it came to pitching for capital, like some of my other members of my cohort were able to do or have done, that's not the circle in which I travel. That's not, like I said, even though my family had this business and we were in, well-to-do circles, it's still just very foreign for me at the time to even think about pitching for capital. I went through a program that they have for business owners about putting together a deck, pitching for debt or equity capital, did all that just for the practice of doing it, just for confidence sake. And I learned more and more about the different levels of capital, things that I've never, ever learned. I mean, they don't teach you that in graduate school, not even in your M&A classes in grad school. And they may brush over it, but the depth of it, I've not met, and I know a lot of Black business owners, other business owners of color as well, women business owners. I don't know very many of them that are VC backed or have private equity dollars. on when we chatted as a group, ladies, and I had mentioned, and Raudline, you called me on this because I was not clear. You said that, because I mentioned now I have private equity people throwing money at me and wanting to do a roll-up strategy, and they want to court me and do all these things. I got to a point where I decided that I don't want the type of business that has me working like a racehorse all the time. I don't want another boss telling me what to do. That's just where I am in this business. This is a family business. It's a lifestyle business. It'll be passed from one generation to the next. I'm in that position. All the money that's in that company is from my family, or it was debt. It was debt capital. And I'm still paying it back. I've not missed a payment. But it is incredibly difficult. And if I were to go to a private equity, like, I don't even know if it's a good private equity relationship. I have nothing to hold it up against. I do have friends that are in that space that I could talk to, but it's terrifying because we as people of color, we look at our businesses differently than others. And this is not me just spouting knowledge. I've read this recently, that we tend to look at our businesses as our legacy, the thing that we're going to pass on from one generation to the next, where culturally other people tend to look at it as a job. So if it fails, it's like, okay, it failed.
Right.
But for us, we put so much into that business. It's our 401k, it's credit cards, it's savings, it's grandma's money, what somebody's social
The whole future.
Yeah, it's a different way to look at it. And as Raudline said, it's not being, it looks risky from an investment perspective.
Ladies, I can't believe what we're packing in, but we only have 4 minutes left in this conversation. Okay.
Oh.
So we're as much as we can talk about this, and I hope our audience sees this, there is so much information from these two CEOs and founders. So I want to make sure that we end with maybe, a very, we each have 1 minute and 60 seconds. Can you just tell me one thing that you want this audience to walk away with, right? So I want you each to be able to say that. So when they go back and they're looking at their businesses, they can say, you know what, I didn't know that. So Raudline, I'm going to go with you. We're going to make this the speed round so we end up on time. But my God, ladies, what an incredible conversation. So Raudline, what's the one takeaway?
So I would say that make sure that you establish networks that are as broad as you can to help you in your strategic thinking about your own career progress. If I look back on my journey, I think the thing that I didn't do as well as I could have, or I didn't do it early enough, was establish those relationships, which are also knowledge centers, right? Outside of your immediate zone of everyday work. I mean, when I talk about looking at the picture 360, that network should also be 360. So try to be intentional about that.
Intentional. I love it. Karla, 60 seconds. What's your one takeaway for this audience?
I would just say that now there's great opportunity for women, people of color, there's money out there now. There wasn't before. Go get it. Find out how to get it. Get into networks that'll allow you to have access to it. Start building your banking relationships now. Start finding those private equity relationships. Talk to people and understand, because it's a brand new marketplace out there. And I wish you the best of luck in getting everything you want out of this.
Thank you. I really want to thank you both. This was incredible. And I hope the audience out there feels as I do, that, there were some stories that I could relate with. And there's people out there that think the way I do. And it's about finding resources, right? It's about getting up out of that seat, bring some resources to the table. And I think that you both provided that. So the one thing I do want to say as we say goodbye, in terms of resources, my friend and colleague, Karla Harris, has a podcast called Access and Opportunity. which is just about this, right? About entrepreneurs and women and people of color. So she was actually nominated for a Webby. So go to the votewebbyAwards.com and nominate Karla. But really look at that podcast because there's some interesting resources out there. So ladies, thank you. I appreciate you. And I hope that the audience out there appreciates the time that we spent here today. So with that, I say good night all.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much. There was tons and tons of amazing feedback in the chat. People want a part 2. We got a comment that this has been their favorite panel that Power to Fly has presented this year. So thank you so much for such a powerful conversation and for being here. And thank you everyone for chiming in the chat. We had to wrap it up because this will close off at exactly the minute. So I wanted to make sure that we had time to close everyone out. But I know that we've been dropping links and we will continue to drop LinkedIn's for you to connect with all of the speakers.